Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller here, along with Sam Ekstrom. Reminder to listen to our longer conversations, the Purple Insider podcast. We'll leave the link in the description or wherever you get your podcasts. And our written work, purpleinsider.substack.com. All right, Sam, let's get into this. Danielle Hunter is back, and so is Sheldon Richardson. I don't think we saw either one of these things coming when the week began.
It's 2018 all over again. The gang is getting back together. This is big because instead of having the potential Danielle holdout, linger into training camp and having to wonder who your passing down pass rushers are going to be, I think the vision becomes much clearer how Mike Zimmer is going to get after the passer. A great compromise for the Vikings to get Danielle Hunter in the door and allegedly clearing up a little cap space in the process, which it seemed like they kind of used apples to apples to take care of Sheldon Richardson, who, by his standards, as he told us, he thinks he had one of his best years ever in Cleveland. I don't know if the stats would back that up, but he was not ineffective. I mean, he was a good penetrator, got after the passer. His pressures were good, probably dropped off a little bit in the run game. But at age 30, to now put him in a role where he can kind of come in on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, and back up Dalvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce, that might be absolutely perfect for him. And he might be right next to Danielle, while that's happening. So now to get them both in the mix, suddenly I think a weakness in the defensive line. I don't know if it's a strength yet, but it definitely is kind of back to the kind of level par right now.
And I think that it's, speaking of par, kind of par for the course for the Vikings to make sure that they find middle ground with anybody that has a contract dispute. If we go back to last year and Dalvin Cook, throughout the summer, there was all the chatter of could Dalvin Cook hold out, and he gets to training camp. He participates in training camp. It ends up paying off at the end of camp when he signs a long-term contract extension. This happened with Adam Thielen too. If you go back a few years, Thielen clearly outperformed his contract. The Vikings made sure they took care of him. And in this case, I thought that the Vikings actually get away pretty easy for right now in the short term, only having to add $5.6 million to what they're giving Danielle Hunter in cash. But at the same time, now it sets up for a decision for Danielle Hunter in the future. And Sam, I think this just speaks to kind of the all-in nature of where they're at with 2021, that they have now signed. Our buddy Chip Scoggins from the Star Tribune texted me about this. They've signed 11 defensive players this offseason, and adding Hunter to this list, it feels like another signing being brought in, but also the way this contract is set up, it's kind of all about 2021 because he could end up with a much bigger deal in the future if he has a good season.
And of those 11, a lot of them are one-year deals too. And, I know that Danielle's is not technically a one-year deal. They did cut 1 year of team control off the contract, but even though he's signed through 2022, sort of like with Kirk, on the defensive side of the ball, the decision point comes after this year because now there's an $18 million roster bonus on the 5th day of the next league year, which is obviously a big number that they would probably like to renegotiate. So Danielle might end up getting his max pass rusher money. It might also come to pass that he deals with injuries and ineffectiveness, and they kind of have a tough decision to make on that. And I mean, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he's still going to be awfully good at his age with his talent, but the Vikings have at least sort of kicked the can down the road on this. And you talk about the all-in nature of 2021. It would have felt weird if Danielle Hunter wasn't part of that. That's kind of incumbent upon an all-in approach, is that you have your best defensive player in the mix and find a way to make it happen. You've got potentially an entirely new cornerback group that are all on one-year deals. Peterson and Breland and Alexander, and Harrison Smith doesn't have his extension yet. He might be in a contract year. Anthony Barr is in a contract year. Sheldon Richardson has a one-year deal. So it all kind of rides on this season, and there could be a lot of big deals doled out this offseason, whether it's Danielle or Kirk or Barr or Harry. And it could be an exodus again. And I think it's all going to depend on just the success overall of this team.
And from that perspective, I'm a little surprised that Danielle Hunter didn't hold their feet to the fire more. I mean, I guess he's betting on himself and saying, I'm going to have a huge year this year, and then I'm going to get that next contract or that extension from the Vikings, because like you said, there's a pivot point there set up in this contract with that $18 million that's set to kick in the fifth day of the league year. So it means you kind of have to make a decision at that point. If you're the Vikings, are you extending him or are you cutting him? And so I think if you're Danielle, you're taking the contract to come back and to prove that you can do it, prove that the neck is okay and you're good to go and you're one of the great players in this league. But I also think as much as they need him, he could have waited out and probably got a little more money. We have seen other players do this for the Vikings in the past. I want to circle back quickly to Sheldon Richardson because now it feels complete. For weeks and weeks, we've talked about, is there going to be somebody else who comes in as a pass rusher, because it just seemed like there was an empty spot there and the Vikings did not draft a pass rusher in the first round to fill those shoes. So getting Sheldon Richardson is a little bit stunning because Cleveland cuts a guy and signs Jadeveon Clowney, who does not have a very good history at all of staying healthy, versus Sheldon Richardson, who does. And where he fits in will be an interesting question to track throughout training camp in the preseason. But the thing with Richardson is I think he fits in a lot of different places. And the two guys who are starting at defensive tackle in Delvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce, both of those guys have never played over 700 snaps in a season. Sheldon Richardson last year was occasionally about 10 snaps per game, moved over to defensive end. So we could even see him take snaps at defensive end, move around on the interior, depending entirely on the situation. And then that allows for other players to kind of mix in as well. I think that they've gone from having about the worst defensive line in the NFL that you could have last year to now hard to argue that this isn't one of the best defensive lines in the league.
Yeah, let me give you an example of what this defensive tackle group looks like without Sheldon. Today at practice, there was kind of a late game situation where the offense was at like the 10-yard line and they had to throw to the end zone. So they put out their pass rushing specialists, Jalen Holmes and Armin Watts, on the inside. And Sheldon was off to the side. He wasn't really participating today, but he would be in that mix now. He's going to be the pass rushing specialist. And Cleveland used him a ton last year. He was not declining in his role whatsoever. He had a career high in snaps in Cleveland. And the sample size being what it was, we kind of saw what he's still good at. He's still good at rushing the passer. He's not as good at run defense. So that means his role in Minnesota is going to fit him perfectly, where let Dalvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce eat up the running game. Let Sheldon Richardson come in on second and long, third and long. And that's going to be a perfect role for him, I think, because if you look at his career trajectory, he's always been good as a pass rusher. That's never really waned. He's only 30 years old, and he doesn't have injury issues. A lot of the big names people were tossing out at defensive tackle, the Atkins, Jarrell Casey, Kawan Short even, all had injury issues last year. Sheldon Richardson didn't. He's only 30, and he's only going to cost them reportedly $3-ish million.
Yeah, it turns out to be a steal for the Vikings for someone who has been in the top 20 in total pressures in the NFL for defensive tackles 4 straight seasons. So there's no reason to think that Sheldon Richardson is ready for some sort of fall off. And this raises the bar of expectations as well for Mike Zimmer's defense. All right, this has been another Purple Insider Extra. Again, the longer conversations, the Purple Insider podcast. Go check it out wherever you get your podcasts. We'll catch you next time.